Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here. You may have noticed that I haven't been around for a little while. I'm not going to go into why that is right now. I have a vlog coming up where I'll explain things a bit more, but suffice it to say for now, my reading year thus far has not been the greatest. But one thing that has helped me through this very trying time is graphic novels. I have always really enjoyed a good graphic novel, but I think in the last couple of years I've gotten a lot more into them. I think in general my favourite style of art, the art that I put up on my walls, is illustration. I love a good picture book as well. I love pictures that tell a narrative, and I do also love that a graphic novel is a great one to pick up when you don't necessarily feel like you have the bandwidth to dive into a new novel. It's not going to be as much of a time commitment, but often it can have just as much of a payoff, just as much of an interesting story or emotional complexity. So today I would like to tell you about my top 10 favourite graphic novels. In no particular order, I do not have the ability to rank these. So first of all, we have one of my absolute favourites, which is Mamo by Sass Millage. I've talked about this a few times now, so I hope you're not sick of hearing it, but it's just so good. It's one of my absolute favourites. This is the story of a young girl called Orla who travels back to her hometown after her Mamo, her grandmother, has passed away. And Mamo used to be the town witch, but she wasn't necessarily a very nice witch, and it seems like her passing has left some kind of mark on the town. All of the magic is kind of corrupted and things keep going wrong, so it now seems like it is Orla's responsibility to fix things as her grandmother's heir. But all Orla ever really wanted was to move away and to get away from this responsibility, to find her own path, and she's very worried that if she starts to help, she will end up stuck here. This is very much a story of balancing familial obligation and the responsibilities passed down through a family with wanting to be your own person. And there is also another girl called Jo who shows Orla around the town and kind of persuades her that she needs to help them out, and the way that they get to know each other and the relationship that kind of begins to develop between the two of them, I really enjoyed. It's also just one of my favourite illustration styles I've ever seen. I love the colour palette used in here. It's so kind of warm and muted. I want all of these colours on my wall in my house one day. Just everything about this. There is a cat that follows them round, there are some funky looking snarky birds. I love the way that the magic is illustrated, and again the emotional struggle in here and the decisions that Orla makes throughout I found really interesting. I just love this one so much, and I cannot wait to read more from Sass Millage in the future. Next up we have one that I'm almost getting out of the way because I know everyone already knows it, but I cannot make this video without talking about Heartstopper. This was definitely a gateway drug for me getting into graphic novels. If you don't know, Heartstopper is a series by Alice Oseman which started as a webcomic and then got popular enough that it was released physically, and there is now a Netflix adaptation as well. But this is a series of graphic novels about two teenage boys who fall in love at secondary school in the UK. One of our main characters, Charlie, knows that he is gay from the start, and he's dealt with a lot of bullying from being the only openly out kid at his school. But then he makes friends with Nick Nelson, who is one of the rugby lads. He's quite popular and seems like he wouldn't be the type to befriend someone like Charlie, but they just really get on, and as their relationship develops, Nick begins to question himself and his preconceptions about whether he might be able to have feelings for another boy. I think that this is a great entry point if you haven't read many graphic novels. It is so heartwarming. It does deal, especially further on in the series, with some quite heavy topics, but overall it just feels so optimistic. The cast is pretty queer in general and it's very inclusive, and the series is still ongoing. The 6th one, I believe, we are on to next, and I don't think we know when it's coming out yet, but you best believe I will be getting my hands on it straight away. If you enjoy coming of age stories in general, then I would say this one is a must read. Next I have a book that I actually only just finished reading the other day, and this is Rune by Carlos Sanchez, or more specifically Rune, The Tale of a Thousand Faces, because I think this is the first book in a series. I would say that this one is probably aimed at middle grade readers, but I really enjoyed reading it at my ripe old age of 25. This is a story of two kids, Cheery and Di, who run away from their orphanage where they're being bullied and accidentally stumble through some ruins into a different world. It is a classic fantasy adventure in many ways, but it's also very whimsical, very fun. There's a pillow goat in here that's just a goat that can change sizes and become as big as a house. I'm getting ahead of myself. Cheery and Di stumble into this new land called the Land of Puddin', and all they want to do is find a way home, although Di is a lot more nervous and anxious and desperate to get home than Cheery is. She's a lot more adventurous. But then they learn stories of the Shadow King, who has been terrorizing this land. And when it turns out that Cheery, who is deaf and uses sign language to communicate, has a natural ability for the magic of this world, which also uses sign to be cast, they begin to wonder if they might actually be here for a reason. Maybe it is down to them to take down the Shadow King. This was just such a fun time. I loved the amount of whimsy in here. Every page seemed to have a cute animal in the background peeking out from behind a tree or a rock. And again, I love the colour palette in here. It's a lot of kind of purple, pinks and yellows, and I really enjoy that combination. We also meet a lot of fun side characters, and I'm really excited to see where the series will go from here. I also really appreciated that Cheery and Di both are quite well-rounded characters, or as much as they could be within this space. Di is really into photography and Cheery is really into food. She loves to cook and she loves to eat as well. A lot of the time she will get distracted from the important magical happenings going on because there is a croissant or some waffles. This was just a lot of fun, very sweet, with a decent amount of action in there, just a proper Portal fantasy, and I had a great time. Next on this list we have The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is about a 15-year-old girl called Morgan who lives on what seems like a perfect island, but she cannot wait to get out and to move on and live her grown-up adult life because she is keeping a lot of secrets from everyone around her, including the fact that she wants to kiss other girls. But then one night she is saved from drowning by a girl called Kelty, who just so happens to be a Selkie, a magical creature who can change between a seal and a human. And Kelty desperately wants to explore the human world, but she has some secrets of her own, and of course as they get to know each other some feelings begin to develop between the two of them. But there are some complexities that come along with a relationship with a Selkie, especially when you aren't even out yet. So many antics ensue. I don't want to give away too much more, but suffice it to say this one made me sob. I really enjoyed the way that this went into how Morgan's actions are having an impact on those around her as well, not just the relationship between these two girls. Of course, Morgan is going through a lot, but that doesn't necessarily justify the way that she treats all of her friends. And I really enjoyed that she was flawed in that way and that we explored those complexities. But this was also just really fun, really coming of age again, which is definitely a theme for me in my graphic novels, but it did have that spark of magic and folklore to it as well. So this is definitely one to pick if a sapphic coming of age with a little bit of magic in there sounds like your kind of thing. Next on this list is maybe one of the only ever horrors I will be recommending, because if you know me, you know I'm a huge coward. But this is When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll. This arrived in at the library that I worked at and I was immediately obsessed with the art style especially, and just with the vibes. This is the story of a woman who is kind of part cat who arrives at the castle of the Countess, who, if you can't tell from the cover, is a vampire. And she is determined to take this countess out for good. Many have tried before, no one has ever succeeded, obviously, but what she finds in this castle is beyond even her wildest imaginings. I really don't want to go into this one too much because it is weird in a great way. This is one of those where even though it's so short, I think I would need to read this several more times to really understand exactly what happened. The atmosphere in this one is just so heavy, and the Countess is a character with such charisma to her, but then things are subverted in such interesting ways. I wouldn't say that this is a full-on horror story. As I said, I'm a huge wimp and I read this one fine, but there is some reasonably graphic body horror in there. Of course, it's in quite a cartoony kind of style, but if that's something that you wouldn't enjoy, then just a warning, that's in here. But it is just beautiful and so atmospheric. It is red, black and white throughout, which I really enjoyed. I just love when an artist sticks to a colour palette and follows through with that. I really appreciate it. And this is definitely one that is a little bit out of my comfort range, as you can tell from the rest of the books on this list, but I'm so glad that I read it, and I really want to read it again sometime soon because I think there is definitely more for me to take away from this one still. And then in contrast, we have another children's graphic novel, which is Nightlights by Lorena Alvarez. I don't own this one because I took it out of the library, but I would like to get my own copy because it really exceeded my expectations. You pick this one up and it almost looks like it's just going to be a picture book. And from the art style on the cover, I assumed it would just be a very cute time. And in a sense it was, but it also had a lot of hidden depth to it. At least I felt like there was a big metaphor here. This is about a very young girl called Sandy who loves to draw. She has such a vibrant imagination and she loves to draw these whimsical, wacky fantasy creatures. And one day at school, suddenly there is a mysterious new girl in class who is very intrigued by Sandy's drawing and kind of gives her the attention for it that she hasn't had in the past. But before long, that attention begins to turn into something a little bit more sinister. I don't want to go into too much more just because it's such a short one, and I think the fun of this is having the surprise of how much depth it had to it. But I will say, if you were a gifted and talented kid in school, or if you consider yourself a perfectionist, if you have a need for validation, if you can't tell, I'm all of those things. But if you can relate to any of those things, then you may feel quite seen by this story. It uses beautiful, abstract, fantastical illustrations to really delve into some of the issues with gifted and talented kid syndrome, as they call it. And I was just really pleasantly surprised by the amount of complexity in this one. I really just expected it to be cute, and it had a lot more layers to it. Next, I would really like to talk about a book from a franchise, and this is the Avatar: The Last Airbender comic, The Search. It's a chunky one. Honestly, I would really recommend all of the Avatar comics and the Legend of Korra ones too, but especially this one. This is one of my favourite books of all time. I just love this so much. I don't talk about it as much as my other favourite books, mostly because I don't know if it would be as interesting if you hadn't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, but seeing as it is one of my absolute favourite shows of all time, if not my favourite show, then I think it's a reasonable assumption that a chunk of the people watching this will feel similarly. And if you have seen the show, then you will know that one of the questions that is left unanswered by the series is, what happened to Zuko's mum? If you found Zuko interesting as a character, then this graphic novel especially really showcases his growth post-series. He goes through a lot of emotional turmoil in here, and I just wanted to give him a hug throughout. But this, again, made me cry quite desperately. Avatar: The Last Airbender is just a series that holds such a special place in my heart. The found family in that show, I think I feel about Avatar the way that a lot of people feel about Six of Crows. And I think as continuations go, these graphic novels just really got the vibes right. They managed to continue in a way that didn't feel like they were just adding things on for the sake of it. So if you are an Avatar fan and you haven't gotten to these comics yet, I really cannot recommend them enough, especially The Search. Next up, what a shock, we have another sapphic romance, and this is If You'll Have Me by Uni. I don't understand why this book isn't more popular. To me, this has just as much heart as Heartstopper. This is about a college student called Momo who is very studious. She's very much a model student and she doesn't like to get in any trouble. And she ends up through a series of different circumstances bumping into another girl called PG, who is very much not in her kind of social range. PG is very popular. She is known to be a little bit of a player, but the two of them really get on and they begin to develop a friendship which may end up becoming something more. But Momo really struggles to get past her preconceptions of PG based on what she's heard about her and the way that she treats other girls. And PG has some problems of her own. This is very much a story of a romance developing kind of against the odds, and it's just so cute. I found this one when I was back at my bookstore job and I bought it in the morning, read the entire thing on my lunch break and ended up crying in the staff room. But just because this is so wholesome and so sweet and just so full of queer joy. I had such a lovely time with it. If you have enjoyed Heartstopper and you're looking for that feeling of a budding queer romance full of warmth and heart, then I really cannot recommend this one enough. I just think that it deserves so much more love. Now, the last two books on this list I don't have copies of because they were also library finds, but I definitely want to get my own copies of them. And first up we have the Lightfall series by Tim Probert, beginning with The Girl and the Galdurian. I'm currently reading the second book in this series. I know that there are at least 3 out, but I don't know how many there are going to be in the end. But this is another series aimed at kind of middle grade, but I know a good few people my age who have enjoyed it. This is set in a fantasy world in which there is no longer a sun, but there are these kind of floating lights in the sky. It's a really interesting world building mechanic, and we follow a girl called Bee who meets a Galdurian in the woods, and Galdurian are a kind of people who have been believed to be extinct for a very long time, so it's a bit of a surprise. But the Galdurian says he is looking for her uncle, the pig wizard, and when they get home to find him, he is no longer there, he's gone missing. So the two of them end up going on a quest, a journey to try to find the pig wizard. These two are very unexpected friends, but the relationship that they develop is really, really sweet. There is also a cat traveling along with them that is always getting up to antics in the back of the page, which is really fun. Again, I love this illustration style and the colour palettes used. There's a lot of green, which always makes me happy. And throughout the story we begin to find out more and more dangerous things that are happening in this world and how these two characters could be more involved than they think they are. Bee also clearly has anxiety, and I really enjoy the way that this is depicted within the art style. The whole vibe of a page will change when Bee is beginning to feel anxious. The illustration style will become a lot more heavy with a lot more shadows, and I always just really enjoy when an illustrator uses their creative craft to depict kind of intangible things that way and experiment. I'm not too far into the second one yet, but I just really enjoy the vibes of this series. I'm really interested by the way that this world is developing and the way that these characters are growing throughout, especially Bee trying to tackle her anxiety to do these life-changing and terrifying things. I'm just very excited to see where the rest of the series will take them on their adventures. And last but definitely not least, we have Thieves by Lucy Bryan. This is another one that I've read in this struggle period at the start of the year, and I'm so glad that I did. This one was actually recommended to me forever ago now, I think, by Ivana from Ivana in the City. I really love her videos and she has really great recommendations, and I'm so glad that I finally listened to her because I loved this one so much. This one is, I believe, translated from French, and there's definitely that vibe to it. It does feel quite French, which I really enjoyed. But this is about a girl called Ella in high school who has a big crush on another girl in her class, but she hasn't plucked up the courage to talk to her yet. But one night her and her best friend end up at a random house party. They don't actually know who's hosting it, but they kind of crash. Ella gets drunk enough that she wakes up in her bed the next morning with not much memory of the night before, but with a good few stolen items in her bed. And then, as luck would have it, her crush turns up at the door to check if she's okay and starts venting about the fact that someone stole loads of her stuff from her party last night. So obviously Ella is in deep. But the two of them are now beginning to get to know each other, and it looks like romance could be blossoming between them. But maybe Ella's crush Madeline has some secrets of her own anyway, and maybe the two of them can work together to right their wrongs. This is messy in such a cozy kind of way. These characters are both pretty flawed, but the way that they handle each other's flaws I really enjoyed. They both go through a lot of growth throughout this story, and we also have Ella's best friend, who is very much a character in here. And it's not one of those stories where the romance is just the focus and any other side characters are kind of cast to the wayside. That is very much one of my pet peeves, but it is not the case here. She's very much a character in her own right. And this is also just really funny. The characters are quite goofy, especially Ella, and kind of similarly to Lightfall, This one uses its illustration style to kind of abstractly present emotions, especially intense stress. There will be moments where a character is feeling a lot and that will be presented in a fun, abstract way on the page. I just really loved this one. There were many moments where I would read a line that I thought was really funny, or I'd turn a page and the layout or the illustration would just be so interestingly done that I'd have to show whoever I was with at the time. This is definitely one that I would love to read again sometime soon. So that is my top 10 current favourite graphic novels. I hope that you found one in there that maybe you hadn't heard of before. If you have any recommendations, I would absolutely love to hear them, because I love to have kind of a stash of graphic novels in my back pocket for when I'm struggling with my reading. They really are the perfect palette cleanser, and they help me to not feel so behind on my reading goal as well. But thank you so much for watching. If you've wondered where I've been, then thank you very much for being patient. Hopefully we'll be back to reasonably regularly scheduled programming from now on. I have some videos that I'm really excited to make in the coming months, so you'll be seeing me around. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.